Over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Excellency, Ambassador Joel, President of the Economic and Social Council, I have seen my brother, Ambassador Munir of Pakistan. I do not know whether the Honorable Minister from Pakistan is joining us, but when he does, we really welcome him. We are really honored that he joined us in this conversation. And Your Excellency, Ms. Greg Boschetti, and His Excellency, Mr. Mayaki, FACTI panel co-chairs, and members of the panel, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this virtual high-level event on the critical issues of financial integrity in post-COVID-19 world. Alongside the President of the Economic and Social Council, today's discussion takes place in parallel to the high-level political forum on sustainable development as we embark upon the decade of action and delivery to implement the sustainable development goals. The virtual meeting of today's event is due to one of the greatest challenges in the 75-year history of the United Nations. The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted billions of lives with far-reaching effects on the health and livelihoods of people. It has also caused economic and financial shocks around the world, some of which are still unfolding. The physical space of many countries has been reduced by virtual standstills of economic activity. This has hurt their ability to fight the pandemic and to invest in recovery. Least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, small island developing states, and conflict-affected states, and those who are yet on track to achieve the sustainable development goals are seriously challenged by the crisis. Existing safety nets are stretched to capacity, and the public resources available may not be enough to deal with the situation we are facing. Moreover, illicit financial flows exacerbate these difficulties even further. Excellencies, we need to keep a firm focus on mobilizing and retaining resources, not only for rapid recovery, but also for longer-term progress in achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. At the outset of the 24th session of the General Assembly in September last year, we convened for the high-level dialogue on financing for development. The dialogue outlined the damage caused by illicit financial flows to both present and future generations, which is posing a major impediment to countries' efforts to achieve sustainable development. These illicit flows involve multiple parties. It requires, therefore, strong political will and multilateral cooperation to successfully confront them. Now is the time, Excellencies, for action on illicit financial flows and financing as we recover from COVID-19 and build back better. Preventing the illicit diversion of public resources, including of COVID-19 response funds, is a critical part of ensuring financing for recovery. These funds must be used by governments for basic service delivery, investment, and long-term recovery from COVID-19. We need to continue to make progress tackling all types of corruption, tax evasion and avoidance, and money laundering. Honorable Minister, Excellencies, a few days ago, we launched the high-level panel. A few months ago, we launched the high-level panel on international financial accountability, transparency, and integrity for achieving the 2030 Agenda, called FACTI. The FACTI panel is expected to contribute to the overall effort undertaken by member states to implementing and financing the ambitious and transformational vision of the 2030 Agenda by making recommendations that both strengthen current efforts to combat illicit financial flows, and to strengthen the international financial system. This panel is working to identify and address the gaps, blockages, and weaknesses in international institutions and legal frameworks that can contribute to the overall effort for financial integrity. Their work takes even more urgency in the light of the unprecedented global fallouts relating to the pandemic. I'm encouraged by the hard work of the FACTI panel and the progress which it has made despite the difficult situation we are all in. I commend the high standard of transparency which the panel has upheld throughout its work thus far. I thank the co-chairs and members of the panel for their open approach to engaging with different stakeholders. I look forward to the update on the progress of the FACTI panel and the initial ideas from the analytical work today. I also welcome your inputs on the future direction of the panel, particularly in light of the current status of the implementation of the 2030 agenda. Honorable Minister, Excellencies, we cannot address COVID-19 and its fallout and its related economic fallouts in a vacuum. The post-COVID-19 reality requires a social contract grounded in financial accountability, transparency, and integrity, among other requirements. The FACTI panel will play an important part in crafting ideas for the new normal. The findings of the panel will add insight in areas where needed, open up the conversation, and help member states find ways to accelerate progress towards achieving the SDGs. It needs our engagement and support. Be rest assured, Excellencies, that I will remain strongly engaged with the panel's work, giving due attention to its recommendations when they are published in 2021. And I'm hopeful that the recommendations will be implemented by governments and all stakeholders to our collective benefit. I now give the floor to my colleague, Her Excellency Mona Jewel, President of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. Yeah.
Thank you so much, President of the General Assembly, esteemed FACTI panel co-chairs, Excellencies, colleagues. Thank you so much for joining today's session, this session about mobilizing and retaining resources to build back better. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, countries were facing financial constraints, and we were already behind achieving the SDGs. There can be no doubt that this situation has hampered countries' responses to the pandemic and to tackling its social and economic consequences. The pandemic has also shaken the fabric of our societies, and we can already see further socioeconomic disruptions coming our way. It is clear that to make progress towards the SDGs in this decade of action, we have no time to lose. Over the past year, financing for sustainable development has been a core priority of mine as presidency of the Economic and Social Council. In all efforts, the Council has leveraged its convening power to support governments ensure adequate financing to get back on track to achieve the SDGs. In April, the Financing for Development Forum issued an urgent call to action to address existing challenges and support those most vulnerable. And member states agreed unanimously on the outcome document of the forum, recommitting to combating illicit financial flows and strengthening good practices on assets return and recovery. In early June, we held a special session on the FFD Forum dedicated to financing and policy solutions to respond to COVID-19, which included commitments by international institutions to support countries in tackling illicit financial flows. And this morning, the HLPF has discussed mobilizing well-directed financing, touching upon very many of the same issues. Dear colleagues, I strongly believe that a well-designed action plan to respond to this global crisis must also include measures to ensure financial accountability, integrity, and transparency, especially in the international dimension. We need to address the loopholes in our financial systems that continue to allow tax avoidance, evasion, and the theft of vast quantities of assets. We must effectively recover stolen funds and assets and return them to the country of origin. The potential gains of enhancing integrity and accountability in our public and private financial systems are massive and can provide financial means to fight the pandemic and to invest in recovery. I therefore look forward to the recommendation on these issues from the FACTI panel, launched by the President of the General Assembly and myself in March. We are confident that the panel will deliver on its mandate and contribute to the overall efforts undertaken by member states to implement the ambitious and transformational vision of the 2030 Agenda. I would like to join the PGA in thanking the FACTI panel co-chairs and all the members of the panel for their hard work. We have seen the panel continuously engaging with member states, international institutions, civil society organizations, and experts to solicit substantive inputs and thoughts with a transparent and open approach. We are eager to find out their independent review of the existing institutional and legal framework, how they will identify gaps, impediments, or vulnerabilities in their design and implementation. We trust that the panel, with your input, will generate ideas and recommendations that we can all get behind. Support from and solidarity within the international community will be critical in facilitating successful outcome of the FACTI panel. We are confident that the panel will help guide the United Nations and its member states toward a future with financial and economic system that truly serves our aims of sustainable development. Thank you once again for joining this effort. Now I would like to give the floor to our distinguished speaker, Mr. Abdul Hafiz Sheikh, advisor to the Prime Minister of Pakistan on finance and revenue, for his keynote remark. You have the floor, sir.
Yes. Excellency President of the General Assembly, Excellency President of the Economic and Social Council, distinguished participants, it's a pleasure for me to join this very important and timely forum, a discussion on the financial accountability, transparency, and integrity. I want to thank the organizers for arranging this very important event and for assembling the right participants. It's now up to us to develop proposals and recommendations that are practical and to show the resolve to implement them. We meet in difficult times. The world has not seen an economic crisis of this magnitude in our lifetimes. Overall GDP globally is expected to shrink by more than 3%. International trade is down. Retail sectors, manufacturing, industry are down. Exports are down. Poverty has risen further. Unemployment has shot up. Gap between the developing and developed countries may further increase, and the achievement of the SDGs under threat. It is very important that we collectively come together, deal at this moment, both with the issues that have arisen post-coronavirus, but also deal with the issue of capital outflows of the illicit sort, which are estimated to be over $1 trillion every year. These financial flows originate in developing countries for money laundering, tax evasion, and bribery, and often reach OECD countries and other tax havens. Despite some progress on anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing under FATF, the OECD's compliance with central FATF recommendations remains low. As a result, developing economies face challenges in mobilizing tax revenues due to tax evasion and avoidance. Similarly, the large outflow of capital adds balance of payments difficulties, forcing developing countries to borrow funds build up forex reserves. All of this translates into years of underinvestment in things that matter most for quality of life, such as healthcare and education and basic needs of our society in general and the poor in particular. We in Pakistan have taken various measures in recent years to contain illicit financial flows through strengthening our anti-money laundering regulations. These regulations have been strengthened up to better standards and in line with international benchmarks. And one of the externalities of these efforts has been that Pakistan's remittances through have increased from $6.5 billion to $23 billion in the last 2 years. I think at a forum like this, we have to identify certain areas, which I hope I will attempt to do now and expect that our colleagues and this distinguished body would take it further. So the first thing is that multinational corporations minimize their tax liabilities to revenue authorities in their country of operations. They have devised sophisticated financial models that enable them to maneuver their way through tax systems and shift their profits to low tax jurisdictions and tax havens that are highly opaque in nature. IMF estimates that 1.3% of GDP loss in tax revenues for the poorest economies as a result of these moves by multinational corporations. And the multilateral framework on tax avoidance is ineffective and creates loopholes which are exploited. There's a need to plug these loopholes for the benefit of the host countries. Again, despite its promise, the global digital economy poses many challenges. Among these are tax-based erosion and profit shifting away from development. Abuse of anonymous shell companies is also a reason why many countries are facing challenges today in the face of the pandemic. These shell companies have enabled corruption, fraud, and tax evasion. Research by Transparency International shows that the overall level of compliance with beneficial ownership transparency standards is low, as many countries have failed to take the measures required to establish registers of ownership records. Asset recovery by developing countries has been slow, and the legal framework remains cumbersome. OECD reports acknowledge that ultimately a huge gap remains between the results achieved and the billions of dollars that are estimated stolen from developing countries. Only US $400 million was returned by OECD members between 2006 and 2012, a fraction of the $20 to $40 billion estimated to have been stolen each year. There's a need also to speed up the dispute resolution mechanism for faster asset recovery. So my proposal also is that this forum may consider developing a multilateral framework for asset recovery with guidelines and technical assistance for developing countries to resolve disputes involving illicit financial flows. Excellencies, I believe that this is a topic with far-reaching consequences. It has also, in spite of the intentions of a few, remained an area where achievement has lagged behind. I think this is an opportunity to strengthen our resolve. We have got the right people in the room. What we need to do now is galvanize support, both from the developed countries in particular and the global community overall, and get the international financial institutions to participate in this very important journey. We have to get the civil society, we have to get the international financial institutions, the IFIs, private sector, multinationals, and the relevant countries to cooperate so that this journey towards development and fulfilling the aspirations of the majority of the people of the world can begin. People are looking at us with expectation, and I think we should do our utmost to try to fulfill the promise. Thank you, and again, it's been an honor for me given this chance to speak at this distinguished forum. Thank you.
Hello? Yes, President, continue, sorry.
Okay, I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hafiz Sheikh, for your very interesting and insightful presentation. I think I then would like to hand over the floor to the PGA, who will present the FACTI panel's work and introduce the two co-chairs. So PGA, back to you.
Well, thank you very much. Again, let me join you in thanking our distinguished brother from the Prime Minister's office for his really useful remarks dealing with really important issues. It's my honor to invite the co-chairs of the FACTI panel to give their report. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay. Thank you, Your Excellency. His Excellency Ambassador Tijani Mohamed Bande, President of the General Assembly, Her Excellency Ambassador Jules, President of the Economic and Social Council, His Excellency Dr. Abdul Hafiz Sheikh, Advisor to the Prime Minister of Pakistan on Finance and Revenue, Her Excellency Dr. Dalia Gribos-Kaite, FACTI Panel Co-Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased to join my co-chair to address this event on mobilizing and retaining resources to build back better financial integrity in a post-COVID world. I would like to thank the President of the General Assembly and the President of Ecosoc for convening this meeting. I hope you and your families are all staying safe, healthy, and doing as well as you possibly can in the face of this ongoing pandemic. It is exciting to know that there are many people around the world watching and joining this event online. It gives us hope to know that despite the difficulties, there is such a strong interest in the work of our high-level panel on international financial accountability, transparency, and integrity for achieving the 2030 agenda. I want to start by reflecting on the COVID-19 crisis and what this has meant for our work. Aside from the tragic loss of human life and the suffering of their families and loved ones, the pandemic has created severe financial and economic consequences. At just the time that lockdowns and recessions have shrunken tax revenues, countries must spend more on health and social protection responses. This emphasizes the great urgency the international community must place on mobilizing greater financing for sustainable development. Prior to this pandemic, issues on financial integrity in the growing space of resource mobilization to meet globalization needs have been flagged. This has to intensify in the wake of economic crashes and slowdowns postulated across the world. As most economic sectors struggle to survive, workers across the board, particularly in countries with poor social protection systems, bear the brunt of a pandemic, increasing the losses in economic and food security. Ladies and gentlemen, our populations need us to take the earliest actions on this, being committed to financial integrity and accountability in achieving set targets, as well as new challenges the pandemic poses. We have to consider the difficult position of countries as a result of COVID-19. As I committed to the UN member states at the launch of a panel in early March, we would be open and transparent in our functioning. In fact, the pandemic has forced us into the kind of openness that even we had not anticipated. For example, we held a string of open virtual consultations with member states, experts, and civil society, which we made available publicly. And through these virtual means, we have been able to speak with those in far-flung places. This has enriched the work of a panel. Our panel's work will further contribute to this aim by helping member states find solutions to pressing challenges related to financial integrity. We cannot afford to let precious resources go astray. I would now want to update you on the processes we have undertaken in the wake of a pandemic, and then lay out some of the substantive issues. My co-chair will conclude the briefing on the substantive discussions and discuss the next steps for the panel's work. Excellencies, I already mentioned the high level of engagement the panel has seen with its work, with hundreds of representatives of civil society in each of its open meetings. We also issued a call for written inputs and received over 30 written inputs from around the world. We further engaged directly with the various international institutions that play a role in financial integrity matters. This has included extremely useful discussions with the standard-setting bodies like the OECD and FATF, as well as with UN agencies, especially the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. I take the opportunity to thank all those who provided us with their input, thoughts, and considerations during these consultations. Their open and constructive approach to the challenge facing countries and our investigation of possible solutions has reinforced my belief that by working as a community, we can create transparent, accountable, and equitable systems and legal frameworks. With these inputs and discussions, the panel moved forward to deepen its analysis with evidence and data, organizing its work in 3 clusters, which are in short on tax issues, anti-corruption measures, and settling of disputes. The panel members agreed to the preparation of 7 in-depth papers to inform the work within each cluster. Expert consultants are preparing these in-depth background papers, and the panel members discussed drafts of the papers at a meeting at the end of June. The experts are currently finalizing these papers as we meet. In keeping with our commitment to full transparency, the panel will publish these papers on its website, though the papers contain the opinions of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the panel. In the course of considering the papers, I made some impressions that I would like to share with you. First, it was abundantly clear that the governments of the world have been working hard to address tax avoidance, tax evasion, corruption, and money laundering. We learned about many new instruments and initiatives that have been developed over the last 20 years. At the same time, it was also easy to see that the implementation of these instruments and initiatives has fallen short. In some cases, implementation has devolved into box-ticking exercises, but in others, there have not even been ticks in the boxes. We can do better. Second, but no less important, we learned about even if the instruments and initiatives were perfectly implemented, they would still not create fully transparent and accountable systems. Those intent on abusing tax and financial systems and avoiding rules and regulations would still have ample opportunity to do so. And they can often do so with impunity and with great reward for their efforts. This is simply not good enough. Third, we have also heard about global governance challenges. I must be frank that this is the hardest area for a high-level panel to make recommendations, for it relies solely on the willingness of member states to agree on new solutions. And the willingness to engage in that cooperation is not in our hands as the co-chairs and members of the panel. So I will conclude with this request. As we move forward, I urge member states to come to us with their ideas and their willingness to work on new or creative solutions. And I would like to reiterate our thanks to the leadership of the President of the General Assembly and the President of Ecosoc. At this time, I would like to hand over to my co-chair, Dr. Dalia Grybauskaitė. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Because everybody already thanked a few times the Ambassador Jewel and the President of the General Assembly, I would like only to mention that because of these two people, we are keeping so busy the 5th month of pandemic. So it is a little bit joke, but I want to mention that it is very important that because of COVID-19, nobody knew that you decided and your decision was done that we will be falling so deeply, all of us, into economic and financial crisis as a result of this COVID-19. And this, because of this, our job and our importance of our work is reinforced. And no country is free from the long-lasting impact, and everybody, we will need to find the response for recovery. And this is very important and essential for our work. And this global challenge reinforces why investments into resilience and sustainability, as called for Agenda 2030, became so important. And I'm sure that collective efforts will yield valuable outcomes as we deepen our work. And I want to address some of the substantive discussions we have had before mentioning next steps. First, in our tax cluster, we have had experts work on papers. First, on tax information production, sharing, use, and publication. The second, on the appropriateness of international tax norms in developing countries. The panel is thinking about the challenges facing international cooperation in tax matters, from a reduced focus on multilateralism, tensions among the across economic groupings, and capacity limitation among small and the least developed countries. Second cluster, the panel has engaged experts for papers. First, on transparency of assets and beneficial ownership information. Second, on anti-corruption measures in source and haven countries. Some of the key issues the panel is discussing include the possibility of harder national sanctions against those who violate the rules, given that states are constantly competing to attract capital and serve as financial centers. The panel is also thinking about the cost-benefit relationship of measures, especially for smaller countries, and how capacity building can help them. In our final cluster, the third one, the three papers covered foreign bribery investigation and prosecution, enhancing asset recovery and return, and peer review of financial integrity. Of particular concern to the panel was that non-trial resolution in bribery cases in supply-side countries should not lead to a perception of decriminalization of bribery or a lack of accountability for any corrupt officials in demand-side countries. On asset return, the panel was concerned about the incentives in place that deliberately or inadvertently complicate the process for asset return and lengthen the time it takes to reach a conclusion. The discussions on peer review actually addresses all aspects of the panel's work, because peer review has become such a foundational part of international accountability among member states. Across all our work areas, the panel wants peer review to not be looking only at legal implementation, but also for opportunities to address actual impact and for countries to learn and improve. Overall, a number of themes that we have been engaging and which emerged in our discussion. The first, the global responses to financial integrity challenges are not just the sum of their parts. They may be closer to the value of the weakest link. Second, trust, inclusivity, and implementation are linked. Third, addressing the constraints to strong action may require a clearer analysis on who can influence the political environment in favor of change and who is resisting change because they benefit from the current system. And finally, we must look to the future to understand how to build back better from COVID-19, but also to anticipate the new technologies and, of course, especially digitalization. Dear Excellencies and participants, we are looking forward to a more depth discussion with the representatives of the member states on the 21st of July. By that time, we hope to have published a number of the background papers as well as the full summary of our end June meeting. We would also like to hear further expectations and any specific proposals from member states, of course, based on the progress of the panel so far and in advance of the publication in September of the panel's interim report. We aim to make our interim report available in September at the time of the General Assembly gathering. But of course, we know that probably we will be not able to meet the heads of states and government in person in New York. We convene whatever in-person meetings that we can manage while holding virtual meetings as necessary. And our panel members are ready to engage with the member states and the financial integrity community in all parts of the world, whatever it takes. I want to close with words of sincere thanks to the panel members for their hard work. As I said, we have been kept terribly busy despite the challenging conditions, and the FACTI Panel Secretariat and members of the UN Core Group for their support of the panel. And I must renew our appreciation to the President of General Assembly and the President of Ecosoc for their vision and very timely vision and foresight in putting this initiative together exactly in the beginning of this year. If we can collectively put our efforts together with those of member states, I am confident that we can greatly strengthen progress on financing the agenda of 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think on your behalf, let me thank the co-chair for this substantive briefing relating to what has so far been achieved, and also for the information that in a few weeks' time there will be a meeting wherein member states are invited to share their thoughts on the way forward relating to the work of the panel. I think with this, let me invite the President of Ecosoc to proceed with the interventions of some of the participants in this hall. Thank you very much indeed.
PJ, and also from me, then thank you so much for very good and comprehensive brief from the co-chairs on where we are at this stage, and of course also the challenges ahead. But I think you really are on a very good path, and we are really very much looking forward to continue to follow your work, and I'm really very impressed at the PGA with your engagement with both member states, other UN organizations, and institutions. So we are really looking forward to the continuation. Let me then hand over the floor to our moderator for the discussion to be followed. It will be moderated by Mrs. Alicia Ortega Husband. She is investigative journalist of Noticias Sin from the Dominican Republic. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you so much. An honor to be here, Your Excellencies and distinguished guests. Good afternoon. The complexities of financial accountability, transparency, and integrity are without a doubt being put to the test with the COVID crisis around the world, pushing governments to make extraordinary public spending commitments. And it is at this very time that every decision taken by political leaders and civil servants and business leaders must be accountable, must be under the microscope if we want to continue saving lives. And several countries in the region, like where I live in Latin America, have uncovered severe corruption practices in government spending towards equipment and testing and supplies dealing with coronavirus. So never has there been a better time, in my opinion, to have such an open discussion on such subjects. So our panelists today, His Excellency Yemdago Eric Tiare, Permanent Representative of Burkina Faso and Chair of the African Group, Mrs. Amira Al-Faiti, Deputy Permanent Representative of the United Arab Emirates, His Excellency Jukka Salovara, Permanent Representative of Finland, Ms. Sharon Burrow, General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation, and Mr. Daniel Malin, Business 20 Integrity and Compliance Task Force Co-Chair and Assistant Professor at Trinity College Dublin, University of Dublin. So I will begin with Ambassador Yemdago Eric Tiare, as I mentioned, Permanent Representative of Burkina Faso and Chair of the African Group. Illicit financial flows out of Africa are a matter of major concern because of the scale and the negative impact of such flows on the continent's development and governance agenda. By some estimates, illicit flows from Africa could be as much as $50 billion per year. The high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa was an important marker in the campaign against such illicit finance. And recently, the member states of the African Union have agreed on a common position on asset recovery and return, seeking to speed up the repatriation of the proceeds of corruption. Yet some African countries are still perceived as being rife with corruption, which can hamper the investment. So Ambassador will be making a statement on behalf of the African Group. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the African Group. At the outset, allow me to thank the President of General Assembly, Excellency Tijani Mohamed Bande, and the President of Ecosoc, Excellency Mona Jul, President of the Ecosoc, for organizing this timely meeting. I also thank the FACTI panel co-chair for a very comprehensive presentation. Excellencies, no more than ever, it has become crucial for countries to mobilize adequate financial resources for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Agenda. The impact of the current crisis not only threatens to erode the gains made towards the achievement of the goals in developing countries, particularly African countries, it portends to exacerbate challenges already faced by our countries by plumbing an increasing number of our population into extreme poverty. Against this backdrop, the African Group reiterates its support for the process and appreciates the progress of the work of the FACTI panel in continuing the commitment of the UN to the 2030 agenda as reinforced in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, especially in bringing balance to the global financing system in architecture. Excellencies, the report of the AU-ECA high-level panel on illicit financial flows confirmed that harmful commercial practice, such as aggressive tax avoidance, which some multinational enterprises regularly employ to erode their taxable base and shift profit away from jurisdictions where they operate, account for 65% of IFSs from Africa. The report also noted that the issue of IFSs is extremely political, and ending it requires paying attention to the political economy of IFSs, including its governance dimension. The COVID-19 pandemic brings into sharp focus the urgent need to stop blinking our resources from all countries to enable investment in much needed public programs, institutions, and services, not least in health, food, and agriculture sectors. In this regard, the report makes special mention of the harmful role of enablers for our intermediaries within certain professions who facilitate IFSs by their technical and professional support to practice such as creation of special purpose legal vehicles, aggressive taxes planning, tax avoidance, and base erosion on profit shifting that are used to extract resources from African countries in which multinational enterprises operate. These enablers are often located in destination countries for IFSs, hence the need for global action on financial transparency and integrity. Additionally, existing mechanisms for asset recovery taken out of Africa are not yet effective to facilitate prompt return of assets from destination countries where they are traced. It is the hope of the African Group that the panel will explore mechanisms to enhance greater international cooperation by encouraging countries and relevant multilateral organizations to strengthen their effort to provide technical and capacity building assistance for developing countries in order to improve their capacity to prevent, detect, and combat illicit financial flows and strengthen good practices on asset return to foster sustainable development. Given that the global architecture in the area of commercial IFSs, the least developed, per the Mbeki report of IFSs, the African Group would like to recommend upgrading the Committee of Experts in International Cooperation in Tax Matters to an intergovernmental body with experts representing their respective governments. Given the extensive support over time from a number of regions, countries, and experts for this recommendation and for a UN taxes convention, we urge the FACTI panel to review this proposal on the role of the UN within tax norm setting as a key facet of advancing multilateral cooperation to solve common global problems. We wish to further request that the FACTI panel should make correct recommendations that would adequately address the gap in regulating commercial IFSs, build on recommendation of the high-level panel on illicit financial flow from Africa, make analysis of the impact of current reform proposal on the digital economy on developing countries, recommend reform to the global institutional architecture through a UN-led process, look at the recently adopted African Common Position on Asset Recovery for best practice in this subject. In conclusion, we look forward to the next iteration of the panel with member states and hope that the panel will, inter alia, serve the purpose of providing concrete recommendations aimed at correcting gaps in imbalance in the international system and thus accelerate the abilities of countries to achieve the sustainable development goals in synergy with Africa Union Agenda 2063. I thank you very much for your attention.
Your Excellency, thank you so very much. Our next panel member is Mrs. Amira Al-Fahati, Deputy Permanent Representative of the United Arab Emirates. The UAE's ambassador in Vienna, Ambassador Al-Kabi, is co-chairing the negotiations for the political declaration of the United Nations General Assembly special session on corruption planned in New York in April of next year. Can you tell us what the United Arab Emirates hopes to achieve in the UNGAS? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Do you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay. I would like first to thank the President of the General Assembly and Ecosoc for inviting the United Arab Emirates to share our efforts and practices in combating corruption. The UAE takes concerted efforts, both nationally and internationally, in combating corruption in accordance with international law. And for our national level efforts, before I talk to you about the political declaration and our role, I would like to mention a few things about what we have done domestically. The UAE has established the Supreme Audit Institution, an independent body with a mandate by federal law to audit government entities, as well as fight fraud and corruption. This audit institution has many national initiatives and programs that aim to curb the spread of corruption, which includes the reporting of violations through official channels and the use of smart applications. It executes its mandate through enforcing sophisticated regulations that conform to the highest international anti-corruption standards. Of course, eliminating avenues for corruption and robust oversight are important tools in curbing corruption's impact. And we believe such actions can ultimately strengthen the resilience of our global economy. The UAE has also contributed significantly to the international community's effort to practice oversight through its participation in anti-corruption agencies and international committees on financial supervision and accounting. One highlight, as you mentioned, is that the UAE hosted the conference of the state parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption in 2019. And in addition to that, we are co-facilitating the negotiations on the political declaration on the special session of the United Nations against corruption in 2021. In our role specifically as co-facilitator, we will aim to guide the membership toward reaching consensus on the declaration, highlighting the importance of international cooperation, intensifying international efforts to reduce the spread of corruption, and of course, urging countries to fully implement the UN Convention Against Corruption, which is the international framework for combating corruption. We, of course, expect that negotiations will be completed by the end of April 2021, and a special session of the state parties to the UN Convention Against Corruption, as you also mentioned, will be held in Vienna at the beginning of May 2021 to approve the political declaration before it's presented to the special session of the General Assembly in New York. I conclude with this, that the UAE in its efforts both at national and international level is guided by the belief that cooperation and exchange of best practices are crucial in promoting and strengthening the international governance framework for combating corruption. And of course, we look forward to engaging with all countries in order to reach agreement on a truly meaningful political declaration in 2021. I thank you.
One question, how do you think COVID-19 and the crisis that we are living right now will affect the outcome?
We don't see, like, of course, I mean, as all the processes, I don't want to say that it will not be affected, definitely. But of course, we will need to consider other aspects, important aspects on how we can, like the implications of COVID on these processes to be considered and reflected in the declaration. We will definitely take that in our consideration during the negotiation process.
Thank you so much. Our third panelist is His Excellency Jukka Salovaara, Permanent Representative of Finland. Ambassador Salovaara, Finland has a reputation as a country where the citizens actually really enjoy paying their taxes. And indeed, there is strong and social expectations for tax compliance. As we have seen in numerous exposés, such as the Panama Papers, not all countries share this approach. You have also recently launched a new program to dramatically increase the amount of aid and technical assistance you provide for other countries in the field of revenue mobilization. So can you tell us, Mr. Ambassador, a bit about how Finland views taxation and what the secret is to this integrity?
Well, thank you so much, and this is really a good and important topic. And you know, we may be good at in a few things, but in tax collection we really excel. I think that the tax gap in Finland now is around between 5 to 6% of GDP, which means in a way that everything that should be taxed is in effect taxed. And of course, sort of an efficient taxation sort of goes hand in hand with having an efficient public administration, and that's probably a reason why our public feel so comfortable in paying their taxes, because they see a return. And the fact that sort of, well, the tax gap is so small in a way that it means that sort of everyone is in the same boat. No one is really can get around the tax system. And this is an important topic also because you mentioned COVID-19 earlier. So we know in a way that COVID-19 will be followed by extreme sort of economic distress. And that's a situation where sort of states and public authorities really need their revenue, which means that we need effective tax collection. And having an effective tax system is also one very practical way of combating corruption in a way. And I'm glad that you mentioned the action program we launched actually this June on sort of focusing part of our development cooperation on taxation, and which means that sort of Finnish tax authorities will partner with sort of different tax authorities in Africa to help them sort of improve their tax collection systems. And I think that experts are saying that in many developing countries, sort of the tax gap is somewhere between 30 to 60%, which means that a major part of potential public revenue is lost. And of course, sort of we will partner, and actually sort of digitalization is part of the picture in a way, because and this will have a sort of immense benefits for business and the economy overall, because implementing a digital tax system means in a way that you will have to have sort of digital tools for sort of registering companies, filing tax online, which means that actually the system and as such will become very, very efficient. And this is, of course, and transparency helps. That's been an integral part of our system, and this is somewhere we will also help African partners. And again, there are sort of very good practical example. There's this outfit called Tax Inspectors Without Borders. So we've all heard about sort of doctors without borders, but tax inspectors without borders is one thing that sort of we're being very active with the UNDP and OECD, and also getting civil society on board is important as well. And there's a very important outfit called the Publish What You Pay initiative, which means that sort of civil society is monitoring sort of the use of public money. But the thing that I want to say is, in a way, that taxation, improving taxation systems in the developing world can really have an important impact in terms of development by channeling sort of financial resources to places where they should go, and strengthening sort of public finance. And this is very, very crucial for Agenda 2030. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think the FACTI panel can contribute to creating international tax cooperation that will help all countries achieve the success that Finland has had in tax matters?
Well, of course, HLPF as such is all about sort of learning from each other. So this is a big lesson where we can sort of share many very practical sort of tools in taxation system, and FACTI can really sort of highlight the issue and spread the word. And perhaps another aspect I should have mentioned is also, is the fact that once you improve your tax collection system and the competence of your tax administrations and authorities, then that's also a tool for improving the inclusion of developing countries into the whole sort of global taxation debate, and ensuring that, global taxation works in a way that's sort of fair for developing countries.
But it definitely has to go to the right channels. I mean, it definitely has to go to good use, and people need to know that that money is actually going towards making their lives better, right?
Yeah, and that's why transparency is so important. And once you have in place a tax system that's seen as efficient and fair, I think that sort of that brings also the public along, because they know in a way that no one can basically cheat the taxman.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Solovara from Finland. Great reputation around the world for Finland. Thank you so much for being with us. Our next panelist is Ms. Sharon Burrow, General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. Ms. Burrow, trade unions have long called for a fair and more equitable international financial system. So what role do you think financial accountability and integrity should play?
So it's everything, really. It sits at the heart of what we want in a just and inclusive future. I was very heartened to see the call right up front for a new social contract, because for working people, COVID-19's just added a whole other layer of crisis. We already had a convergence of crisis with historic inequality, income inequality, racial injustice, gender injustice, and it was driving the age of despair and anger that you saw from civil unrest, whether it was around income and livelihoods, whether it was around the last few weeks of racial injustice, or indeed whether it was around climate and a future that guarantees hope for our young people. And along with those crises, we've seen not just a breakdown in the social contract, but because of it, we've actually seen deepening distrust in democracy itself. So we need to repair these things, and we'll only do it if we're all working together with that aim of a just and inclusive future in our mind. So, the business as usual model is not acceptable, because it's failed working people, it's failed the planet, and now we need a recovery with a resilience foundation that aligns people and planet with economy. And that will take all of us. So thank you for the opportunity, but thank you for the work you're doing, because I'm going to tell you that this is going to be a very tough road to climb, but we have to do it. We, of course, want to see jobs, jobs, and jobs, because that gives people hope. There have to be decent work with secure employment, rights, and health and safety. But we also need to see the promise that the UN system made, goal 1.3, in fact, of the SDGs, for a universal social protection system. Because right now, not only have we got 300 million jobs at risk in the formal economy, in the informal economy, including in platform business and internet mediated jobs and others in our own developed economies, so both developing and developed economies, 60% of the workforce is informal. 1.6 billion in the poorest countries are actually facing destitution right now, because if they don't earn an income every day, then they have nothing to rely on and nothing on which to feed their families. So the SDGs remains the best pathway for us to actually build that just future, and it's the inclusive elements that are built into it. But also, it's the only way to build resilience, because further global shocks will come. If you think that COVID-19 began as a health crisis, and I heard many people saying we have to invest in health, we can never stand back again and actually say we're going to underinvest in health, in education, in care, childcare, aged care. It's the fabric of our societies. And so we have to look to the SDGs that build the jobs and the funding for those sections, but also for the equality question for women. This frees women to work in other parts of the economy. And of course, that's one of the largest medium-term multipliers of jobs. So we have to get there, and that will take financing. So if we're going to do that, if we're going to invest in jobs, in infrastructure and industry policy for climate transition, health, education, care, as I said, public transport and development, repair of ecosystems and sustainable agriculture, as well as digital connectivity for all. So even as the world pivots to a more digital world, 50% of our brothers and sisters have no access to the internet. So it will require, as well as national investment, a universal solidarity and a global solidarity to include that vulnerable nations have the fiscal space and the financial support to shape a better future. What does that mean? Well, in a few dot points, it actually remains with the G20 finance ministers coming up with the IFI discussions. We need an extension now of that 1 year of debt relief for the poorest and most vulnerable countries. We're backing in the AU on this, absolutely, but we're adding another demand. No more conditionality that's about austerity or structural reform. The only conditionality should be that those nations invest in financing critical SDGs. Absolutely critical. And that should be what we are focused on. The other one is, of course, we need agreement on a broader scope for those special drawing rights with liquidity swaps for development that's aligned again with the SDGs. We need a global social protection fund with a 5-year guarantee of funding for the poorest countries. That will avoid destitution, it will build jobs, and it will ensure resilience because it will build the sustainability itself. Can I tell you that as we're already approaching a $10 trillion spend in the crisis phase, could be double that by the time we get to the hope of recovery. We just want 35 to 37 billion as a start globally to finance for the least developed countries, universal social protection, income support and health. But then across all of the countries, if we're going to meet the test of the SDGs, we need deep and sustained stimulus measures. And that will require a targeted medium to long-term approach to investment and indeed to long-term debt. We have to restructure the way we think about investment building the future and our patience around both capital and debt. No more of the speculative economy where the ratings agencies and the bond markets can kill economies. Let's take an approach to development inclusion that works. And it will take, as many of you've said, a repair and renovation of taxation system, because this is the basis on which government can invest for jobs in public service, industries which need industry policy for inclusive and sustainable development. And those taxation measures on our watch must deal with the unfinished business, the end to tax havens and the tax evasion measures, and I must say a lot of these are in Europe, which is going to be really tough for European countries to face, but they must. If they're going to invest in business, and we want them to, provided it carries job guarantees and wage guarantees, then there must be conditionality. No use of tax havens, no share buybacks. Let's build a more robust and inclusive business model. So we want the unfinished business dealt with. We want the financial transactions tax to end speculative capital greed. We also want to see a digital taxation measures, because there are so many now, the big tech companies, which must be broken up by regulation. And again, you know, congratulations on the EU to the EU for taking this on, along with many other measures that give us a window of opportunity to this sustainability. But if we don't get digital taxation, then you've got global monopolies simply escaping. It will be equivalent or more already to the illicit financial flows which must already be tackled. And we think it's time, frankly, to look at new mechanisms apart from those. Why not look now at a billionaire's tax? You know, Oxfam's got incredible figures out there, head of the G20 finance ministers, around just how many billionaires in the world. I'm sorry, but they can't spend this money. And it's not just about philanthropy. Everybody appreciates that, where it's on offer and it's justly targeted, but we absolutely want a share through the government coffers, because how can we rebuild trust in democracy if we don't do that? And that has to go along with my panelist who said, co-panelist who said that the elimination of corruption is fundamental, and that means a trusted rule of law in every country. So these are big ambitions, but that's what the SDGs will take. We can do it. The policy prescriptions are on the table. People have talked about them for a very long time, together with the UN's commitment to financing the SDGs for a recovery and a resilience that builds that just and inclusive future. Then that's what we want. A new social contract, rebuilding trust in democracy, and just transitions for climate action.
Thank you so much, Ms. Burrow, for your panel participation. Our next panelist is Mr. Daniel Mainland, Business 20 Integrity and Compliance Task Force Co-Chair and Assistant Professor at Trinity College Dublin, University of Dublin. Mr. Mainland, working in the fields of integrity and compliance, I have no doubt you have heard many times the characterization that business is the bad guy, cutting corners in order to make a fast buck, or passing packets of cash under the table to get a lucrative deal. So in your work with the Business 20 and outside of it, how do you view the role of business in compliance and integrity matters, and what priorities for action have you developed?
Well, thank you very much, Your Excellencies and esteemed guests. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation. And secondly, let me congratulate the FACTI panel on the excellent work that it has done and the progress that it has made. I think perhaps the first thing to say is that the private sector is not homogeneous, as we know. So we have to be careful when we talk about the private sector, because there are different challenges associated with different industries, different regions of the world with their own regulatory environments, and of course also in terms of the size of companies, from multinational corporations all the way through to small and medium and sometimes micro enterprises that need to address the issues that are important for them. Within the field of compliance and integrity, I think a couple of things that I would like to highlight here, based on the work that we've done within the B20 task force, but also some work at the World Economic Forum, where I serve in a Global Future Council on integrity and anti-corruption, is that we have to move beyond the concept of compliance. We know that many companies around the world have excellent compliance programs, but that is no longer enough. And in all the work that I've done, there seems to be a growing trend now to say that we have to move to, we have to commit to integrity beyond compliance. Just one example, we focus on the work of gatekeepers or enablers. There's hardly any major fraud, I think, or act of corruption in the world that is perpetrated without the ethical failure of, in some way, of either a bank or a legal firm or an accounting firm. And it's not because they are complicit, sometimes they are, and that makes it worse, but it is because very often they simply focus on the compliance issues. And even if you are 100% compliant, but you go to a client and you say, well, let's see how we can make this work while it still remains legal, then you have a problem. So first of all, beyond compliance to integrity. Secondly, something that is featuring quite strongly on most agendas at the moment is to talk about technology. Technology has moved from simply speeding up the way in which we do things to changing what we do and how we do it. And of course, it's a double-edged sword, so it is utilized by both the corrupt and the ethical. But companies need to invest in technology. We use the term tech for integrity, and in advancing whistleblowing processes around beneficial ownership, for example, technology can really play a part, and the use is encouraged. And then finally, and just to conclude, the whole concept of collective action, which once again is not a new concept, but it is one that is becoming increasingly important if we are working, within this space. And COVID obviously has accelerated some of these discussions and crises. If we talk about the repair or building back better, or the great reset that has been mooted by the World Economic Forum, we have to work together. And that's both public and private sector, but also within the private sector, companies need to come together in their industries to work together to fight corruption and to make things better.
You mentioned legal firms. So what sort of responsibility do you think professionals and service providers, such as lawyers and accountants, should bear for those misdoings of the companies and wealthy individuals employing them? Should they also be held accountable?
I think they should. I mean, they play a key role. They are remunerated quite handsomely for the work that they do. And I don't think it's good enough any longer for them simply to say, well, we were 100% compliant in the legal sense of the word in terms of what they'd had to do. I would like to see those firms also being held accountable for some of the principles that sometimes they don't adhere to, like integrity and accountability.
Thank you so much. And thank you to each and every one of you for participating in a discussion that affects every company, especially in times like we are living, this global crisis. It has been my honor. I will turn it over back to His Excellency Mohammed Bandi, President of the General Assembly. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think obviously I'm not qualified to summarize this really rich and varied discussion, but certainly on your behalf, I will ask my friend and co-convener to speak. But just to say that certainly the work of the panel led by my brother Mayaki and our sister Grebo Seti had been extremely useful. I have seen how it has elicited really important contributions. And I have no doubt that the ideas so far that have been generated, I think, and to be also added on to in July should give us really a very concrete report. I am very confident that it will move the needle in the direction that we want. And ultimately, the idea is that to have a less corrupt world, to have therefore better societies, there will be less fear, there will be more development, more peace, more security for all of us. This is really, really the main objective. And I really thank the panelists for their insights, and the members of the speakers, and of course, and you, Madam Moderator, for the excellent work you have done. Let me again conclude by thanking all of you to also emphasize that I will be really interested in pursuing this conversation. I would like to ask my colleague, the President of Ecosoc, to conclude the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President. I couldn't agree more with what you just said. I think this has been an extremely enriching discussion. So I would just like also, and given the time, just to join the PGA in thanking all the distinguished presenters, and of course an excellent moderator as well, which has made the discussion really, as I said, very much to the point on an extremely important issue to secure our financing for development also in time of the COVID-19 crisis. And of course, last but not least, once again, a big thank to the panel, of course, to the two co-chairs, also other members of the panel, for excellent work. We are really looking forward to what will come, and you can rest assured that you have both the PGA's and my continuous support for this very important work you are doing. So I think now the meeting has come to an end, and